Alright, today we're going to talk about the species and archetype choices for the Genesys role-playing game, but first a quick thank you to our sponsors, Patreon. This video was actually requested by one of my patrons, and for just $2 a month you can get a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the show, new shows coming out, pick new games for me to buy and new games for me to cover, new topics of episodes, because, you know, I wouldn't have even thought to do this, probably, but someone suggested I do it, so now I'm doing it. Alright, so, let's talk about the archetypes. First of all, they got them scattered all over the fucking book, just annoying as shit. Page 36 is where they have the original, for the core 4 human archetypes. There's 4 variations, it's their version of the whole. Humans are really flexible, and all the other species are just, you know, walking, talking stereotypes. So there's 4 kinds of humans. We got the laborer, who's a physically tough person. The aristocrat is a talker. The intellectual is a intellectual, and then the well-rounded average human. Now, the thing about these is that they all have a really unique, interesting ability that typically involves manipulating destiny points. In fact, in general, most of the species and archetypes are way more interesting than the ones in Star Wars. Like if you lined up some of my favorite species from Star Wars, they would look very similar to these. Speaking of similar to Star Wars species, the average human is exactly like the basic human variant in Star Wars, in the core books. However, there's one difference. It has an additional thing called Ready for Anything, which involves some story point, that's what they call them, not destiny points, story points, story point pool manipulation. But beyond that, all the stats are exactly the same. So the average human is objectively better in this game than in Star Wars, which was a little unsettling to me because they base all their species off of the average human. They start with the average human, and then they have a system, which they actually go into detail in here. I remember they had an interview a couple years back, or at some point, talked about making the species for the Aces source book. Anyway, they kind of peeled back the curtain on their system for creating species, starting with the human, and then certain things are worth a certain amount of points, and they take away, add things, blah blah blah. Then they get to a certain point to where here's a new species. And then they playtest it and make some changes. So that made me wonder if the regular human is the basis for all the species in the Star Wars series of books, well then, it would be the same here, right? So if this one is objectively better, then wouldn't all the species be kind of objectively be better than the Star Wars species, or most of them? And that's not really the case. I mean, I compare, let's say, the laborer to a Wookiee in Edge of the Empire, and there's some differences, but you can, if you look through their system of species creation, they even out, or they feel pretty even. Like, I don't think it's that big of a deal. The laborer to a Wookiee or other similar brawn-focused archetypes or species, and the same with like the aristocrat and other talking species like the Gran and the Twi'lek, they feel roughly even, although the aristocrat has an amazing ability. I personally like it way better than the Twi'lek or any of those other talking species, but there's a difference between I find it more interesting and just the value of the species. It depends. Anyway, I don't think the Star Wars species on the whole are objectively shittier than the Genesys species, so you don't really have to worry about, you know, you're not going to be gimping yourself if you want to reskin a Wookiee and put it into here. I don't know, maybe make a new type of orc or other creature or whatever. If you want to transfer them back and forth, that's totally fine. Just make sure if someone in your group is playing a human, they play one of these, because these are definitely better than the basic human. Although there are human variants in Star Wars, so I don't really know. I don't own any of those yet, so I can't speak on those. But yeah, anyway, you can move species back and forth without any worry that you're hurting your gaming experience. Anyway, laborer, really tough. Everything about them is just about being tough in a variety of ways. Intellectual has an amazing ability, which I've talked about before, which is great for any type of smart, focused person using their smarts in a variety of situations. And the aristocrat special ability is ridiculous, and I've tried to disprove myself, but no. As always, I was right the first time. They have an amazing ability, which could be used in combat. And, you know, can't be used that often, but it's pretty impressive in combat. If you just use it in just the right way, especially if you set your character up like that. There are some things you could do with that. That would be fun. It's meant to help you with talking encounters, but yeah, that could be great with combat. And, yeah, definitely way more interesting species choices so far. Let's move on to... Now, all the other species are in the settings section, which This is I hate the way this book is organized. Such a pain in the ass to go through. And honestly, it looks like a fucking chemistry textbook. That's what it reminds me of. I want to put a textbook in this side by side. Can you tell which is the textbook, which is the rule book? In the fantasy section, we got elf, dwarf, and orc. And the elves are just really agile in multiple different ways. And they don't really have anything that's like really out there and weird, to the point to where you could easily reskin them as a human, just a different human variant if you really wanted to. Maybe it matches your character better, and especially if you're not doing a fantasy setting, there are no elves, but I want to play a character who this matches, this fits whoever I'm making really well. Can I do it? I think it's totally reasonable for the GM to say okay. Tell the GM Steve said you could do it. And yeah, that's pretty good. They're not terribly interesting. They don't really give you anything else to do, but, you know, you get some improvements. That's nice. The dwarf gets a classic dwarf ability, Dark Vision, to help them seeing, and they are really tough. They are very similar, actually, to the brawler, laborer, the human laborer. You can't really do the whole human variant thing with them. Dark Vision is, that's a dwarf thing, or that's a non-human thing. You'd have to get rid of that. You could look into the section on building your own talents and species to get a sense of how many points this particular thing might be worth, and let's take it away, and then give me something else, or give me just more starting points equal to that, if you want to tweak it a bit to better fit your character. Now, for the orc, I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I say they are brawn-focused. I think we kind of assume that would be the case. They get a really great ability, Battle Rage, where they can make a choice and they can make themselves more combat effective if they make that choice. So I love that. New things, give me new decisions to make. You know, gameplay, give me more gameplay. Although some people prefer the more passive approach, which is what they did with the elf. That's fine too. But no, I want more decisions, especially right out of the gate. Give me more things to do, and that is great. That is wonderful. Now, the thing about tweaking species, my philosophy is that I don't want tweaking to happen too much, because it's very easy to kind of min-max your character from the species standpoint, and you're not really making your species or a variant of a species, you're just making your character. This is just a way of doing it, to getting it to exactly your character, exactly how you want them as much as possible. And I think it can be taken too far, too much in the way of min-maxing. I think it's reasonable if, you know, you want to play an orc in a non-fantasy setting, but kind of reskin it as some other kind of monstrous creature or really dangerous character. Yeah, I think that could work. Or if you want to do some tweaking, like switch a pair of characteristics for age or just a variation. You know, you might be an orc who's the runt of the litter, or an orc who's been around the block. You know, he's in his orc equivalent of the 80s or 70s or 60s, or he's just an old man orc, and he's very wise, so maybe you switch brawn with cunning or intellect. I don't mind that bit of tweaking, but I wouldn't take it any farther than that. You know, if you want to play a frail orc who's kind of smart, or at least not dumb, or even just not a terribly strong orc, then why not? Or maybe switch that brawn and presence, and you're playing like maybe like an orc-human hybrid kind of thing, because you still look human, so you're pretty. Humans and elves are generally considered pretty, so I guess the closer you look to human, the prettier it would be, the higher presence would make more sense. So maybe a half-orc kind of thing. You could switch brawn and presence, maybe switch out the skill they get. I don't know. Anyway, what else do we got? What other settings give us new species? So that's what we got. 7 so far. Steampunk. Oh, Steampunk gives some great ones. We got the Mongrel and the Revenant. The Mongrel is basically a were-person, werewolf, or could be were-cat or whatever. The Revenant, I talked about before in my character creation video, built a zombie space cowboy. Anyway, they are an undead. The way they're described, the Revenant is more of a Frankenstein kind of character. And they actually, especially if you're playing in the setting, the default setting, Sovereigns of Steam, whatever the fuck that is. I think it's new. Anyway, if you're playing in that setting, they talk about how, because the process of electricity bringing your corpse back to life, you're going to have memory issues. So that's kind of fun. Of course, you don't have to play it like that. It's not actually statted. Anyway, what else? The Revenant. Yeah, I talked a lot about the Revenant before. Not much else I can say about him that I didn't say in that other video. They are physically tough because they are a corpse. Tough in a variety of ways, very tough, resistant, not very good at talking to people. Although the penalty for talking to people, it's more of a vague suggestion, but it's significant. It's significant. You are a walking corpse, and in this world, it's not very common. People are gonna freak the fuck out. And same actually with the mongrel. But of course, if your setting is different, maybe corpses are sort of a normal part, or the mongrels are a normal part of the world. Let's see, aren't there werewolves in World of Warcraft? Aren't there a whole species of werepeople? Maybe they're more common if you're doing a World of Warcraft game. I don't know how common they are. If you're in a setting where these species are more common, maybe don't do that penalty, and I don't know, would they have to buy off that penalty? It's hard to tell if that's really even taken into account with the whole balance issue. I would ignore it. It's not that big a deal. It's kind of a big... It's not concretely defined, so it's hard to tell if you should really take into account from a balance standpoint and adjust the points accordingly. Should they buy off that penalty if the setting calls for it, or just ignore it? I don't know. Do what you want. Anyway, the mongrel is cool because the way they set it out, it's like you would expect a whole werewolf thing to be, where under certain circumstances things are going badly for you, you can turn into a werewolf against your will, or werecat, or whatever it is. You can try to prevent it from happening, or cause it to happen by will, but that's actually kind of difficult to do. Not a guarantee, you can't do it that often. Although, there is just the way it works, if you read the way it works, there are certain talents which could give you more control. There's like a Berserk talent, Tier 2 Berserk talent, just the way it works. What is it called? Yes, Berserk. Deals with melee combat, and just the way it works, you could have a bit more fine control over this new form, which, anyway, what it does is, the way it works is, couple numbers increase, couple numbers decrease, your looks change, of course, you know, turn into a were person. You get a couple bonuses to your attacks, in addition to the bonuses you'd get from your stats changing. So that's pretty cool. And of course, in this form, you have a lot of trouble talking to people, as same as the Revenant did. And yeah, that's about it. That's a really interesting species. Now, when you're building your were person at character creation, you have to keep the 5 characteristic limit in mind, because this follows it. It can't push you beyond that limit. It will manipulate some of your characteristics, and so if you don't want those to go to waste, you know, if you don't want this ability to go to waste, I guess, don't put those characteristics at 5, put them at 4 at max. The thing about this, that when I first saw it, like, it seems really significant. I guess it kind of is, but not in the same way that you'd want a transformation, like, power to be, or transformation character to be. There's nothing in this book that really is like the Hulk or Colossus, and obviously I'm naming superheroes. They don't have a superhero book. They have nothing on superheroes. I gotta talk about superheroes in this game. I might do a video how to turn this into superheroes or something. Anyway, it helps in certain situations if you transform, especially in combat and other physical related tasks, but not to a huge extent, which I guess, you know, your species shouldn't. And that's the thing, you're not going to have a Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of situation, which Jekyll and Mr. Hyde isn't like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Jekyll and Hyde, the movie, which I guess is not a great example, but this frail character, and then he transforms, and then he changes, and in a way you almost have this sort of jack of many trades kind of approach, because under certain circumstances you fill this other role, and then normally you fill more of an intellectual role, but then this happens and you can beat the shit out of people. That would be fun. That's a bit harder to do, because the difference is it's impressive, but it's not game-changing in the way you'd want that character to be. Maybe when a superhero book comes out, we will be able to build that type of character.